The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey, Ilya, how's it going?
Hey, Ben. Doing okay. How about yourself?
I'm doing, it's been a week. I've been crazy busy. I don't really talk about it very much on here, but sometimes I do projection design for theater, which is when you create video elements that are used in a live play. And, I do it every now and then. Or, to use the last 3 weeks as an example, I do 3 plays right in a row with no stopping. And in fact, I put it together on Monday that I had done 2 shows from scratch, designed them from scratch and programmed them and delivered them and went to tech within a week.
Damn, you are a busy mofo. Good for you, man.
It was a pretty
good for getting it done.
It was a pretty exhausting week. I'm not going to lie. I was pretty tired by the end of that. And it's still going because the second, one of them opened up and then the other one still has another week to go. It's called The Singularities. It's being done at the Road Theater in North Hollywood. And they have another week of, previews and stuff. So there will probably be tweaks. But I have built, once you have the project built, at least it's about, changing elements, but not like coming up with everything from whole cloth again, because that's a lot of work. Anyway, you, on the other hand, have been burning it at both ends at NAB, and I'm excited to hear about it, but we've decided to punt until next week when all the dust is settled from NAB. I'm hearing stories about new Blackmagic cameras. That's really all I've been hearing about is the new Blackmagic camera.
Yeah, I think that it was a fairly quiet year at NAB. Blackmagic did have a couple of big releases that excited and enticed some people. I have some further thoughts on that. And I got to play with those cameras a little bit, so I got a little bit of a firsthand opinion. But really, NAB was probably the most empty as far as foot traffic I'd ever seen. But I think we should wait until next week when the dust settles, because there's a little bit of more perspective I'm sort of reeling in. And there was one really amazing, clever thing that I saw. Ooh. But I'm gonna just wait till next week.
Did you hang out with Michael Cioni? Did you go to the Strata party?
I did go to the Strata party. Michael threw a great party, and I gotta say, hats off to whoever picked that place. The place was called Flight Club. And let me tell you, Flight Club in Vegas, totally worth going to.
I thought the first rule was you don't talk about Flight Club.
This Flight Club you definitely do talk about. It's darts, but someone has, and this is going to sound funny to say, gamified darts in the same way they gamified golf at Top Golf. So if you're familiar, or,
so they've really gamified something that was already a game.
Correct. But what they did, they basically took darts, which required you to know rules, and it required you to have certain technique. And they took almost all of that away. They kind of turned it into a video game. All the scoring is automatic. You throw real darts on a real board. They have cameras, which are tracking the flight path of the darts and know exactly where they land. And they have replays, and you kind of play in the whole bar against other people. There's a leaderboard. It's a pretty impressive, really pretty cool thing. And myself and my sort of crew, we actually ended up at the top of the leaderboard at the end of the night. So that was pretty cool. So I enjoyed it. Yeah. So anyway,
I'm sorry that I missed out on it, but I can't wait to hear all the NAB news that's fit to print.
Yeah, the Hot Rod Cinepod party went off. That was pretty amazing. We were at the Fireside Lounge. We had a great turnout, and holy crap, it was a good time had by all. So thank you for all the listeners of the podcast who came out and joined us. It was great to see you and meet you there. And I can't wait to do it again next year. Next year we'll have to do it again. Hopefully maybe next year you'll be there, Ben.
Hopefully I can go with you next year. That'd be great.
So Ben, who is on the show today?
It's an interview you did with Amy Vincent.
It's great. I love Amy. What a fun interview that was. I'm so glad that it's come around. I get to talk to her about all kinds of things, including an award she just won and a movie I really like and I think has been very influential, Hustle and Flow. So definitely stick around for the interview in just a few minutes. But Ben, what is our close focus?
And now, close focus.
So I know you said that you got some things going on. You got your bees in a bonnet. You got some opinions about a announced remake or reboot of Blair Witch.
We don't know. So for those listening to this who don't know my background, my first really big credit was as production designer for the Blair Witch Project. And I didn't just production design it. In fact, I'm not a production designer. Look me up on IMDb. You'll see exactly one production design credit. That's it. And I wrote a bunch of the backstory. All the people who made the Blair Witch Project, we all went to college together. They brought me on board because I was a nerd for the paranormal. They brought me on board because I would do it for the money they were paying, which was, I believe,
a lot. I hear everyone made huge money on that movie.
300 smackers a week, my friend. And that's in 1997 dollars. Anyway, so it was announced this week or last week that Blumhouse is doing a reboot or a remake or a re-something of Blair Witch. We don't really know what it is yet. And the first thing that happened, of course, when that kind of thing comes down, is all of us who worked on it contact each other, and we're like, "Did you know about this? Did you?" And none of us knew. None of us had heard anything about it.
So the reason that you guys all do that is because this has happened twice before, right?
Correct. So we made the Blair Witch Project huge, toast to Sundance in 1999. Then went
on to become the highest grossing independent film of all time.
At the time. I think we were eclipsed a few years later by My Big Fat Greek Wedding. I think to this day, we might be the movie that made its budget back over the most times, which is...
Yeah, that could be, because the budget to start with was very low.
Yeah, it was like $35,000, I think. I've always said it was $25,000, and recently I keep seeing it was $35,000. And I guess I could ask the guys, but I haven't.
Yeah, there's an extra 10 grand in there somewhere.
Yeah, floating around. Someone made it out of there with 10 grand. Stuck it to the man. Anyway, so then the following year, so it came out in July of 1999. The following year, Blair Witch 2 came out, and the original creators were not included. They hired one of the finest documentarians alive, Joe Berlinger, to direct it, and he worked with a writer named Dick Beebe. And there's kind of a myth around it because there's a lot of people who believe that it was a misunderstood work of genius and that the studio forced him to compromise his vision, and if they hadn't done that, it would have been better. To which I say phooey. And for those watching us on YouTube, I have a little treat. I didn't really plan this, but right here, you probably can't read it. This is my copy of the script of Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2 from 2000. Printed on red paper because they didn't want it faxed or copied, and my name is handwritten on every page, so that if I shared this very precious information, I guess I would have, broken an NDA. They could have sued me. Whatever. Didn't happen. I'm very good with confidentialities. Anyway, here's the point. They chose to disregard what Ed and Dan, who were the original writer-directors of Blair Witch, I should say Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick, what they wanted to do. And what they had wanted to do at the time was a period piece, like the origin story, a 1700s witch story, much like Robert Eggers' The Witch. I feel like it would have been like that. That was when I saw The Witch, which came out, 7 or 8 years ago. I was like, oh, that's what Ed and Dan wanted to do. Studio wanted no part of it. They wanted a modern day sequel. And so they got it with Joe Berlinger. And to people who say that Book of Shadows had a secretly good cut, I saw the cuts. There wasn't a secretly good cut. That movie was greenlit in January and started filming in March. It is not enough time to develop a good script, and it was in theaters that October. So, no movie existed in January. 10 months later, people were paying, including me, by the way, were paying to see it in the theater. Now, was I down on it? I was not. I was rooting for it. I wanted it to succeed because if it succeeded, that reflected only well on everyone involved, including us, even though we didn't work on it. Didn't work. Artisan, not because of this, but because of a series of questionable choices. Artisan, who owned the rights to Blair Witch, go out of business. A few years later, they sell to Lionsgate. Then it sits fallow for 15 years. In 2016, they bring on Adam Wingard, who I've always said you could not have made a better filmmaker in a laboratory to make a new Blair Witch movie than Adam Wingard, who at that time was not known for Godzilla X Kong and the stuff that he's been doing now. He was known for making really great horror movies like The Host and You're Next. He was awesome. I was actually kind of excited about it, but I was completely boxed out of it. And the other guys were kind of read into it. Ed, Dan, Greg Hale, our producer, were read into it a little bit, but only like after it got made. They made it and they called it The Woods. And then at Comic-Con, famously, they had a screening of it. People went in to see it, and while they were watching it, they didn't know they were walking into a Blair Witch movie. They changed all the posters and all the banners and everything, and when they came out, it was all Blair Witch. And you know, the movie came out like 2 months later, and I went to see it opening weekend, hoping to love it, and was greeted with, like, on opening night at the Hollywood ArcLight, when that still existed, about a third of an audience. And I saw it with Dan Myrick, by the way, and I was like, oh, this doesn't bode well. And didn't do well. And like, I think Adam Wingard's great. His writer, Simon Barrett's great. I'm not down on any of them. I'm not even really down on Lionsgate for doing it. I was a little personally bummed out. It wasn't like a giant wounding of my soul, but it was like I had been a big part of every even Blair Witch 2, which I didn't really work on, I consulted on. They had me read it to make sure that it would be consistent with the mythology and being consistent with all that stuff. I wasn't like given editorial say-so.
Well, Ben, let me just interject too, because I know a little bit about this. You know, we've known each other a while. You've told me some of these stories. You were also involved in like some of the lore and the other special like television projects that all kind of came to support Blair Witch, like after the fact. There were like special, made for television, documentaries.
I wrote 3 pieces and directed 2 of them. The first thing I was ever hired to direct was a special for Blair Witch. And the first thing I was ever hired to write was the first Curse of the Blair Witch, which Ed and Dan directed, but I wrote it. I got to quit my job as a guy answering phones at a corporate headhunting company in the Valley so that I could go write that for them. And then it played on Sci-Fi, had great ratings, and that a lot of people credit with why people thought Blair Witch was all real, which we never said it was real, but whatever. So
let me tell you, when I was at CAA, at the time when that movie was coming out, there was rumors floating around, this whole thing about it being like real found footage, like a real story. And that was like, there was people going like, come on, no way. And no one had really seen it yet. So it was definitely a thing.
Anyway, so this announcement had us all chatting amongst ourselves about like, did you know? None of us knew. It was announced at CinemaCon last week. And there have been some spicy takes. Josh Leonard, who is one of the actors in the original movie, posted a thread on Instagram. Maybe we can link in the show notes, and you can certainly look it up. And he's super mad. And I think the actors have a point, which is it's their faces and their names. They use their real names and their voices that are used to market all this stuff. There's only one like actually big successful movie that came out of this, and it's them. And their take is pretty spicy. I went to Twitter and kind of posted my thoughts on it, which were more or less what I've just said. All I'm saying is, I'm not even saying that I know that I have the best possible route forward with Blair Witch, but I think it would be neat if the powers that be who were making this film had a Zoom meeting with all of us, brought us into the fold, maybe got us, as Lyndon Johnson would say, inside the tent pissing out instead of outside the tent pissing in. And I love Blumhouse. Lionsgate has made many great films. I'm not trying to be a douche about this, and you can go on Twitter and see the thread that I posted, which I wrote it while I was waiting to take my son in to have blood drawn for a blood test. So but it's like 6 parts, 7 parts. And then the Hollywood Reporter contacted me and spoke to me, and I was like, am I committing career suicide by going on the record about this? But it was like, the horse is already kind of out of the barn. And again, I'm not saying anything negative about anybody. I don't harbor any negative feelings. I have no negative feelings about Joe Berlinger. I have no negative feeling. I definitely don't have any negative feelings about Adam Wingard or any of these people who are trying to do it. But I would point out that both times it has flopped maybe is a strong word. Both times it has not achieved what they wanted it to achieve. What was the common thing? They both were modern day stories about 20-somethings with cameras in the woods running around. And I just want to say, I think we already covered that one. There's so many other stories to tell in this universe. And I think we covered the one about the 20-something kids with cameras running around. And, Joe Berlinger is a very anti-shaky cam. So Book of Shadows, not a very shaky cam driven movie, but it still is a bunch of attractive 20-somethings in the woods with the cameras and looking for the witch. And I feel like sometimes when you see a success happen, and when Hollywood, it's not just Hollywood, I think it's every business. When you see a success, you look at the immediate obvious signifiers of that success, and that's what you try and replicate. And I think that it's easy to look at the Blair Witch Project and say that's what people were attracted to, when I think that that is the found footage version of it. I don't think you can get any more juice out of that. I think that idea has been done. I'm not saying you can't make a found footage movie. I'm not saying you can't make a great found footage movie. I'm saying in the Blair Witch universe, I'd move away from that because I think we get it. You know, I don't think it gets done. And I'm not saying that we're like mega geniuses. I think we stumbled into something that turned out well. I don't know that it can be done better than it was done in 1997. And I think it's maybe worth looking into other approaches. And I don't know if we're going to get a chance to pitch. I don't know if I just shut a door at Blumhouse that will never open for me again. I certainly didn't mean to, and I have never said anything negative about Blumhouse.
No, in fact, all you've ever said is how much you love Blumhouse. So yeah. I can tell you, it seems like you love way more that comes out of Blumhouse than I have ever loved. So. Anyway, the story is still developing. I don't know where it's headed. I will update, if they have us in for a meeting. I mean, they might have us in for a meeting and it's like, no, that's not the direction we want to go in. I will personally be sad if they're like, the direction we want to go in is it's a modern day story with a bunch of 20-somethings and cameras in the woods. But anyway, in addition to doing projection design on 3 plays in rapid succession, in the middle of that, this came up, and it's not actually a bad thing. All of us who worked on it all got on a Zoom. We have not, I don't remember the last time we all talked about this. And I bet it was 2016.
No, not even then. I mean, in 2016, Ed and Dan and Greg, I think, were kind of read into it. I think I was the one who was not. The bummer of that to me is I designed the stick man, which is like the symbol of the thing. And so it's weird to go down the street and see a giant billboard with my symbol on it. And it's like,
it's not weird. It's pretty freaking cool, I think. I think it's pretty freaking cool to drive by and see a billboard with your thing on it. That's pretty cool.
It's true. It would have been nice to have, I'm not saying that they needed to pay me money or anything. I'm not being a greedy weirdo, but it would have been nice to have had a conversation about it before I saw that, And to have been kind of read into the project as someone who was part of the construction of the thing that they were making. But I don't know. It's the business. It's the nature of the business. It just came out that they're making a new Naked Gun movie and they're not including any of the original people who made the Naked Gun. So, this is just the way it sometimes goes. And I know that there's no ill will inferred, implied, or intended. So that's not where I'm coming from at all. But anyway, that's my feelings on the subject. And I hope that whatever they do, it would be nice if we got consulted, but even if we don't, I hope whatever they do, it's a runaway success and blows everybody's mind. That's my sincere hope. And no matter what it is, I will be there opening weekend to see it.
All right. Well, we will continue to follow the development of this, undoubtedly, since they just announced it. I'm sure there'll be more news to come. Ben, I think we should probably get to the interview with Amy Vincent.
Here we go.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
Joining me now is Amy Vincent. Amy, welcome to the Cinematography Podcast.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Amy, I think you're probably best known for movies like Hustle and Flow and Black Snake Moan. And you've got a new movie that's about to come out that just debuted at South by Southwest called A Nice Indian Boy. We're going to get into all of that, but I want to go back. I want to talk about early Amy Vincent, the early days. I was looking at your IMDb. Looks like you started as a camera assistant working your way up on some pretty B-movie titles. I want to say one of them was like Chainsaw Hookers or something like this. Movies like that, your earliest days didn't drive you away from the industry. You were like, I'm going to come back and I'm going to do more of this. Talk about the early days of getting into the business.
Well, I was actually an assistant editor first, and that was partly because that was the first job I could get. Some of my friends worked in post-production, and we all came to LA from Santa Cruz, California. And, I would see people syncing, slating and other things while I was syncing dailies in the editing room. And I thought that is really the job that I want. And I eventually was able to, I kept asking and asking, and I eventually was able to get on set as an intern. And everybody should have a movie like Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers on their resume. I think I got paid $50 for 4 days. And that was the whole movie. So yeah, not something I want to spend my valuable cinematography podcast time.
Well, you got to start somewhere, and a lot, $50 for 4 days. That's probably better than my first few jobs put together. So that's kind of how it goes. And but there was something about those early experiences, working on set, that made you want to keep coming back and want to keep going after rising up in the ranks and becoming a DP. When did you get the bug? Where did that come from?
Well, I was in pre-med at UC Santa Cruz. I planned to become a veterinarian. And then I got a work-study job hanging lights in the Performing Arts Center. And the rest is sort of history. I mean, I just really fell in love with the whole idea of having a crescent wrench in my back pocket and focusing lights from up above. And it was really technical theater and live behind the scenes, from doing sound mixes for punk rock bands and hanging lights for the Royal Shakespeare Company, that really roped me in. And then concurrently, I was taking a film history class where this incredible teacher named Bruce Kaywin introduced us to everything from silent film history all the way through. And it was really the German expressionists that got me. Murnau in particular. And then the theater arts department and the film department were part of the same thing. They were together at UC Santa Cruz. So, I had a very sort of math and science background. And then I discovered this whole area of the arts and the technology behind live performance. And that's sort of what got me going. And I never got my veterinary degree. There's still time, though. There's always time. Eventually made my way down to Los Angeles, started in the editing room. My very first job was actually in Los Angeles, was winding through old silver nitrate prints in the Warner Brothers archives. And that turned into a little more time in post-production. I became a member of the Editors Guild, but I always had the aspiration to go into the camera department. And I worked with the best operators, Martin Scher.
You certainly did. And you worked on Heathers, which is still, I think, one of my favorite movies.
That was one of my very first union jobs. And I took over for a camera assistant named Dee Arbucci. She was on the very first movie I did as an intern. And that just goes to show you that you meet people along the way and they carry you forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, John Candy movie like Who's Harry Crumb, Little Man Tate, Cast a Deadly Spell, Father of the Bride, Fire in the Sky, and Natural Born Killers, Bob Richardson, Clueless. I've got a tween at home who just watched Clueless for the first time the other day. And Pleasantville, I Heart Huckabees, actually as camera operator. But yeah, tons and tons of stuff that you did during this time. But in the, I want to say maybe early to mid 90s, you also started shooting. So you started, I think probably Eve's Bayou was the first feature that I saw in your filmography. I don't know if that really was your first feature, but how big a deal was Eve's Bayou for your career?
I would say probably the biggest. I went to AFI sort of in the middle of my camera assisting career. And, I worked under John Lindley for many, many years. And I wasn't sure I wanted to be a cinematographer, but I knew I wanted to be an incredible human like John. And, learning, I guess when I went to AFI, I really wanted to see if I had what it takes. That was quite a journey. I was in a place where I could I could go on being a world-class camera assistant for a long time and work on really exciting movies with really great DPs. And it was tough to choose. And it was through my thesis film at AFI that I was introduced to Casey Lemons. And I was at a point where I had done so much shooting for free. I'd done so many short films and, with borrowed equipment and, over holiday weekends. And one of my producing colleagues, another student at AFI, Jim Wilson, who just was won an Oscar for Zone of Interest. He was working for a producer named Cody Chubb at the time, and he said, "Oh, they're looking for a DP for this short film." And I said, "Yeah, I've had enough short films." And he was like, "No, I really think you should take a look at this because it's in preparation to make this feature script." So they gave me the script for Eve's Bayou, which, it was an amazing script from the get-go. But it was to make a short film to be Casey Lemon's calling card. I really did think I had done enough of those things for free, but I said yes one more time, and that was the time. And, there's a lot of lessons in there, but I think the special people and the special projects come together. Not every project is going to be that, but when you see the makings of one of those really special projects, that usually the source is the script, and the source of the script is the person. It was really one of those things where you could tell just from page one that this was going to be a really, really personal story, and also an incredible collaboration. Now, it took 3 years between when we made the short film and we actually made the movie. It seems like a long incubation period there, but Casey and I we had a really wonderful collaboration, and we went on to do another movie too. And Eve's Bayou was a really big deal because it was my first movie as a cinematographer. And I'll never forget, I was operating for Bill Pope on Gridlocked. It was my last A-camera operating job, and they all kick you out of the nest in different ways. And Bill said to me, "You really should get yourself an operator." And I was like, no, I'm going to operate, it's my spot. And he said, "No, get yourself an operator." And that was really great advice and led to a really long collaboration with Henry Klein, who became my operator for about 10 movies after that.
I think that a lot of people wrongly assume that the cinematographer's job begins and ends, day one on set and at wrap, but all of the prep and then all of the post and all of the finality of putting those projects together, and even the press that continues afterwards, it's, these projects, maybe not like a director, but they stick with you for a very long time, and you're involved into it so deeply. You kind of only get your that one first chance to kind of like experience it before the politics comes into it. And the politics of this industry I think are famous, and we don't have to dwell on necessarily all of the aspects of it, but it turns out there's a lot of masters out there, and there's a lot of people that you have to kind of keep happy, and you have to also fight for yourself, and you have to, as someone once pointed out to me, that it's like dodging bullets like half the time and then firing a few of your own, meanwhile still trying to complete the project and do the things that you set out to do in the first place. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah. Hearing you say all that, I think as you become a more weathered or experienced collaborator, you learn how to recognize the people that you share a work ethic with, or that you share a certain care and concern for humanity with. And then you have something to base your choices on. I feel really lucky that I have an artist in residence position at LMU, Loyola Marymount University, and that gives me the freedom to really choose what I want to do. And tiny movie like A Nice Indian Boy is such a joy and a pleasure because of the collaboration with the director. It's a tiny movie. We shot the movie in 19 days. It was $4 million. And it was funny because Roshan, the director, and I met for a different project about a year before A Nice Indian Boy happened. And that was a Disney movie that he was doing. And I guess Disney wanted someone with more music video experience than me. But Roshan and I recognized our collaborative compatibility. We both did. In that interview that we had. And I remember coming home and saying, "I just met the most amazing person. I want to make a movie with him." He's a practicing oncologist. He's a Harvard-trained doctor. He has an incredible work ethic, and the personal aspects of the story for him were also really apparent. So cut to, he came back to me when the script for A Nice Indian Boy was in his hands. And the second we met, I felt like this was going to be one of the special collaborations. You collaborate with a lot of people in this industry, and when you even get that inkling that this might be one, then you really want, it doesn't matter other limitations. And when we originally embarked on the movie, it was quite a bit bigger, and we had a false start in January of last year, and then we got back up and going in April.
Let me interject something real quick here, because you gave me so much to unpack. We were talking about politics, and then you said you find your people, essentially. And then you brought it all the way forward to Roshin. And I have to say that, like, that seems to be a real theme. Do I talk to anyone who has any sort of longevity in this industry, is that they find their people, and you begin to understand how short life is, and that you really want to spend it with the right people involved in these creative pursuits, so that you feel like you are achieving not just something creative, but something important to the people who are involved, and that there's so many people who are involved in it that maybe it's best not to spend that time. And I think that it's brilliant that you also worked in LMU, because definitely I want to talk about LMU and what's going on with that. It sounds like a really fantastic creative way for you to be able to give back to a new generation. But let's get into A Nice Indian Boy, which just had its South by premiere. It's being billed as a gay rom-com, and it's got a really incredible cast. I mean, you had a false start. How did the movie come together in such a micro budget in a small period of time? How did you pull it off?
The numbers don't really matter, but we basically ended up in about half the size of what we thought, less than half the size of what we thought budgetarily, and therefore time schedule wise. And something I learned from Roshan is that his sort of doctor mentality, and which involves a certain amount of practicality and also a extremely high level of empathy. We were a good combo, and we did not shoot a single thing that he was not absolutely sure was going to end up being in the movie. And that was, in a lot of ways, it's quite that simple. It's like we knew we had a very specific amount of time. We knew that we had to find locations close to each other to facilitate the schedule. We knew that we were coming up on the urgency of, we obviously had to finish before the actor strike was due to hit. We were in the middle of the writer's strike. There were so many sort of challenges heaped on top of Roshan, but his ability to stay mindful, and he's so organized that during our prep, we would do this thing called running the list, where at the end of every prep day, he had his little list and we ran the list. Well, I learned that that's something that surgeons do with their team of residents. And now I do it all the time, no matter what project I'm on. Even if I'm cleaning the house or organizing for taxes, I run the list. It's pretty funny.
I love that. I'm totally going to adopt that. I think that's great. Yeah.
Now we have a little slang. It's called let's RTL.
That's great.
But when I think back about it, I think that the amount of personal aspects to the story for Roshan really resonated with me as his primary collaborator. I mean, he's gay and Indian, and he didn't come out until just 6 years ago, and he's very open about talking about all of this stuff. And he was not completely welcomed by his own family in terms of his life choices. And that's more his story to tell. But what I will say is that I was able to recognize so many aspects of this story that we were telling in A Nice Indian Boy that were very, very personal to both Karan Soni, the star, who is Roshan's real life partner, and they're going to get married sometime soon. That's also his story to tell. It was really a thrilling privilege to be part of that level of collaboration where you're helping somebody tell their story. And most collaborations are, if you have that blessed thing of being in balance with somebody else in terms of the amount of care that you have for the material, then it doesn't matter how, let's just say, it would have been great to have more time and more money to make that movie, but I love all of the things that came together to make this simple little movie. And where it fit for me into my own journey is, it's really important to me to be able to make a movie that means something to a slightly different community. in terms of the LGBTQ aspects of it, it is so cool to have a really funny rom-com that's gay and Indian, and we made it for almost no money. I hope it creates a whole new genre.
Yeah, well, it's doing really well with the critics too. Like the initial critical response has been overwhelmingly positive.
And ultimately, it's a movie about love and acceptance, and I think that has a place in the world right now. Hope so, anyway.
I definitely think so. And look, you've got a pretty diverse career. You've dabbled in doing some television. You also shot This Film Is Not Yet Rated, which definitely was was a documentary and caused a bit of a stir, pulling back the curtain on the rating process, which I think up until that point was pretty opaque for most people. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that you do, like LMU. So you've been an artist in residence there now for a little while. Tell our listeners what that's all about.
I had a couple of consultations with the new dean at LMU. She had been, I think, a year there when I first met. We met to just talk about how I have done quite a great deal of teaching and educational stuff over the years. Sometimes, initially out of need, when you don't have a movie after movie and you're just establishing yourself, I feel like it was almost unplanned in the sense that I didn't really know how much I love teaching, how much I love sharing my wisdom and experience. If there is any wisdom there, I'll let you know. In the early days of my teaching, it was initiated out of need, and then it became something. And there's something really beautiful in that. I needed a job, I needed a purpose, and I needed, of course, a little cash flow. In those lean days, when you first embark on a cinematographic career, it's not always, I like to feed my dogs expensive dog food. And
that's right.
Anyway, the point of what I'm saying is that
the famine's real. The struggle is real, for sure. Yeah.
Is that, to discover not only that you're particularly gifted at something, but also that you really enjoy it is really, it was such a mysterious blessing that I'm now just sort of seeing come into full view. Now, I did quite a lot of thinking about how I could fit into that picture, and I'm not going. The simple things in life all come to bear because the fact that I live 10 minutes away from LMU made it really easy for me to say, okay, I'll try this. We knew the writer's strike was still going full swing. We knew the actor's strike was pending. I didn't officially sign on until June, which is really late for the fall semester. And Dean Moore was able to present me with an idea of what I would do and also quite a bit of freedom in terms of my own time. And that is the real tricky thing to having working professionals in education, is because the freelance schedule doesn't always lend itself to being able to, be committed to. And once you begin a semester with a group of young people, the last thing you want to do is leave them in the lurch. It's just, there's a level of dedication that I have to those young people that I wouldn't want to interrupt it. But the beauty, I call it the thin silver lining of the writers and actors strike, is that I was able to really dedicate myself to that first semester of artist in residency because I didn't have one foot out the door wanting to be somewhere else. There was nowhere else to be. And there was another really big sort of educational epiphany in me where I realized what it's like to really dedicate yourself to a group of young people. And I called my course Visual Storytelling, the Art and Technology of Collaboration. And I took both directors and cinematographers, and with the intention of there being some pairs in the class. I ended up with way too many students in my class. It was a huge thing to take on, but it ended up being, now we're seeing the films that came out of that class, and I gotta say, it's all worth it when you have that sort of honor and privilege of helping a young person navigate their way through this crazy world with the idea of collaboration and creativity being the things that can support them. It's been a really gratifying time. Then they came to me and asked me if I would continue into what ended up being the spring semester. And we were in the height of actor strike and no one knew. And I said, well, I'm gonna, as long as I can build in this, when I go back to work kind of thing. They gave me a lot of freedom so I can go off and be on set sometimes. Right now I'm trying to organize how it's all going to work for next year, because in academia, everything gets decided. So it has to be decided so far in advance. But I really appreciate what LMU does for me in terms of they really respect my other life, my professional on-set obligations, and we try really hard together to make it work out for the students. I have to say, just having something to do that feels like it has some positive impact in the world. And I love young people. I can't deny it. I love young people, and I love being part of their discovery of collaboration and creativity to solve their own problems. And it's been quite incredible. I have a lot of thank you letters to write this semester, because I actually make the kids do it, but we do a really awesome class photo, and then we send out different letter with all the kids signing it and everything. It's pretty fun.
I have done a lot of that over the years, and I got to say, I always really enjoy getting the thank you letters. It's a bit of old school courtesy that goes so far, and I think that's fantastic that you institute that in your brood that's entering into the world, because that little bit of courtesy is so forgotten these days. It's really pretty remarkable. Amy, I'd be completely remiss if we didn't talk about your collaboration with Craig Brewer. Most specifically talking about like Hustle and Flow, because personally, I think that might be, you won the Cinematography Award at Sundance back in 2005 for that. That might be my favorite movie of yours that you've ever done. And I feel like it has this incredibly iconic opening shot. Like, I pay really close attention to the opening shots and closing shots of movies. And you've got this oblique angle close-up on Terrence Howard's face. And it's like, it has stuck with me ever since. It is such, on really his chin, his jaw. And it's like, and it just holds for such a long time. It's really wonderful. I don't even want to go get into the cinematography of it. Tell me about how the movie comes about. Tell me how you connect with Craig. Tell me how that project became a thing.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that shot, because it literally starts like super tight on Terrence's mouth talking. And I remember when the very first read that I had of that script, my literal response was, where the hell are we where people talk like this? And I took that initial instinct and turned it into the shot, because it's like you're so tight, you don't know where you are, and you keep widening out and widening out. You realize you're inside the Chevy Caprice under an underpass in the streets of Memphis. Yeah, but that was sort of a literal interpretation of my own reaction and response to first getting the script. But let's go backwards. I was doing a second unit on a movie called Biker Boys that Stephanie Elaine was producing. Now, Stephanie is responsible for so much of my career. She was in the dance department at UC Santa Cruz when I was in the lighting department. Stephanie was producing the Biker Boys second unit, and I was shooting it. And she handed me this dirty VHS tape, and she said, I want you to watch this. And I thought, oh, it's like her son's student film. It's, but it was Craig Brewer's first film, The Poor and Hungry. And I went home and I watched, I still had a VHS player at that time. And I watched this incredible shot on I think it was mini DV, this movie that this director had shot himself with, clip lights from Home Depot and stuff like, and one other person as the sound man. And I really saw something special in it. So I came back into work and I said, wow, that's amazing. And then she gave me the script for Hustle and Flow. And then Craig and I met, and I happened to bring the photographs of both Bernie Imes and William Eggleston to my first meeting with Craig. Well, it turns out William Eggleston lives in Memphis, is friends with Craig, and Bernie Imes is also friends with Craig. He did a series of photographs called Juke Joint. And it's amazing how like still photographers' work could resonate so much with both Craig and I that was literally the trampoline from which we jumped off into our collaboration. And it took quite a while from that initial decision to work together to when the movie was actually made. Hustle and Flow went through a whole bunch of iterations before it actually came to be. You know, Stephanie Elaine sold her house, partnered with Singleton, and there were years in between there. That's sort of the start of it.
That's quite a circuitous route to get there. So you get the script, years go by, you meet Craig, you have this wonderful connection over the same sort of aesthetic, the same photographers, you both really like them. Talk about then day one. So finally, the money comes together, the cast comes together, and it's not like Terrence Howard and Taraji P. Henson, were unknowns, but let me tell you, this was like a star-making movie for them. This catapulted them so many more notches up into the stratosphere. I mean, going into this, were you guys psyched? I assume it was shot on location in Memphis. It looked like it was hot as hell. Was it summer? Is it? I mean, because it looks.
Yes, to all those things, and I think the beauty of where my collaboration with Craig and the process of making the movie was what the movie was about. The two folded over on each other. I mean, it's the idea of making music or making a movie by whatever means necessary. And there was something that became so apparent in the process. For example, we tried on a whole bunch of different formats. Like, what are we going to shoot? Are we going to shoot, at one point we were going to shoot mini DV because that's what Craig knew. And then when we settled into the Super 16 of it all, that was so important to me, to have a compact camera system and to have a camera that was unintimidating size-wise even. And I'll never forget, I shot some tests. I basically shot some material in Memphis in the context, with Taraji and Terrence and some of those deep oranges. And I'll never forget sitting in this roadside movie theater in Memphis with Craig, and they put up, it was this tiny little roll. It was like our tests because we could only afford to process a certain amount. And this grainy, contrasty, super effed up, beautiful photochemical thing came out on the screen. And Craig and I both were sitting next to each other in this big empty theater. And we were just like, he said, "Are you ready?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." And now I still strive to have that level of creative freedom and be able to push photochemistry as far as we did and have it all come together in a way that just felt so appropriate to the subject matter and to the process. It was, the making of the movie was the same as the subject matter of the movie. And that's part of the beauty of it all. And then, there's a certain color that kept repeating itself, this really deep brick orange. And Craig likes to think that's his Hustle and Flow orange, and he carries it over like it. There's a color of a blanket in Black Snake Moan that is on the couch that Christina Ricci is on for half the movie. And that was very purposefully selected because it was the same color as the orange bench in the studio in Hustle and Flow. And that color comes from color saturation of Eggleston's photographs, and it all just sort of keeps going like that.
How long was the shoot? I assume that this was very...
Hustle and Flow was 23 days.
Wow.
So doing A Nice Indian Boy took me back to those days of not really having very much time. Yeah, 23 days. And nobody had shot a movie in Memphis in like 4 or 5 years. And all of a sudden, in comes Walk the Line, Faden, Papa Michael, and James Mangold. And they come in with their big budgets, and we were staying at the sort of crappy hotel where they would park their catering trucks. And we'd get home from work every night and see what kind of new big equipment they had going out on their show. Every day it was kind of funny. It's kind of funny. I shot at exactly the same time in Memphis.
That's fun. Okay, so you mentioned though the digital intermediate, which was very, very new at that time. Hustle and Flow got a full DI. You scanned the film and colored it and then put it back out.
Yep.
Wow. Talk about that process. Did you do it solo? Did you do it with Craig? How did the look come about then for the final output?
That was my first DI with Walter Volpato. And Walter, we've finished a lot of movies together now. Walter had come over from Rome to put in the first DI rooms over at Photochem. I guess they realized in the process of him putting in the rooms that he was not just an incredible Da Vinci guy, but he was also a technologist, but he was also quite a brilliant artist. And I was, at the time we were coloring Hustle and Flow, I was shooting second unit on a big Nicole Kidman movie called Bewitched. And I was driving from Culver Studios, which is way over on the west side, at the end of the shoot day over to Photochem where Walter worked. And Walter would be listening to Italian soccer matches. And I'd get there about 8:30 or 9 p.m. And then we'd work late into the night. And it was just the foundation of our collaboration was really built in those early days of Hustle and Flow. And I think to this day, Hustle and Flow, it represents the type of work and the style of it. It represents a feeling of the way you approach the work more than perhaps I get to do. There was a certain level of freedom that I had on that movie. And I feel like it's something I will strive to do. But also working with Walter, it helped us establish a colorist cinematographer relationship that I carry forward to this day. I mean, it's 20 years now. It was 2004 that we shot that movie. Holy smokes, time goes by.
And it's still influential to this day. I don't know if while you're at South by you happen to catch a movie called Kneecap, but Kneecap is the story. It's the story of West Belfast rappers, essentially in a Hustle and Flow sort of like quasi narrative docu sort of thing. And I was not the only one. When I left that theater, I was talking to a couple other people. They were like, Hustle and Flow? I was like, Hustle and Flow, absolutely. So yeah, I hear that movie referenced, the visual style and sort of like the subject and the struggle and sort of like the down and dirty and just raw sort of feeling of it. It's become something that is really, I think, a cultural touchstone, which not a lot of movies have that.
That's sort of like the greatest compliments, I think, when as a filmmaking team, you make an impact on the films of the future.
I agree. And speaking of which, though, you won an ASC President's Award, which for our listeners who don't know necessarily what an ASC President's Award is, let me just rattle off some of the other people who've previously won this, like Doug Trumbull for movies like Blade Runner, Albert Maysles, Richard Edlund, Francis Kinney, and I believe that Nancy Schreiber won it as well. So it's like you're in a very elite group of people now. Congratulations on this. This it's kind of like a lifetime achievement thing. It's a really big deal.
Yeah, it is, and I, as humble as I pretend to be, it was really awesome. And it was also quite a lot of work to follow in the footsteps of all the other President's Award honorees. But it was magnificent, but it was also really, there's something about being acknowledged for everything that you do and not just cinematography that made the award feel so perfectly timed for me, because I'm at a place where I'm finding equal amount of purpose in my life to be giving back to the young people, to be a part of the governance of the ASC and the Academy. And the timing, it authentically felt appropriate. And it's hard for me who I do, maybe my humility is fabricated, but I was very, very humbled by it. But I also acknowledge it was so wonderful to do all the work leading up to it, because I really had to process how I feel about my own journey and all the people that contribute to that. And even like choosing the people who sit at your table and the people that I forgot in my speech. Oh my God. So stupid. What I really hope is that it inspires other people to, especially underrepresented by gender or color, people to be in governance and take on leadership roles, because that's the only way we're going to really see real change in terms of inclusion in our industry. I term out off the board at the ASC this year. I get a year off. I'm really looking forward to it. I don't know if that's okay to say, but it's a huge honor, and it's not lost on me what a big deal it is being able to send the article from American Cinematographer home to my family. I have another aspect of my life which is really important to me, and I was able to integrate that into my article, which is all the animal stuff. I have a couple dogs, one of whom is losing her eyesight, which is complex in and of itself, but my animals are a huge part of my existence. And living near the ocean, we spend a lot of time on the beach. And so instead of doing a corporate portrait shoot, because they want pictures of you for all those articles, I had Johnny Simmons, who's a really dear friend, Johnny Simmons ASC, still photographer. He brought one of his proteges out to the beach to do my portrait. I chose the location. I brought the dogs, and the dogs ended up in my portrait. So that was really cool. That's I can't wait to shoot my next project, because I feel like I bring a whole different kind of spirit to it now that I've spent 7 months, 2 semesters basically with the young people. And I do have a new show that I should promote, Parish, on AMC Plus, starring Giancarlo Esposito. You can see the trailer online.
I love Giancarlo.
It's about as different from A Nice Indian Boy as you could ever get. But there's cars blowing up and stuff like that. And we'll see what's next.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Let's say people want to get more Amy Vincent in their life. Do you exist in the social media world at all? Are you out there? Are you on the gram? Where can people find you if they want to find you?
Amy V. Vincent.
On Instagram. Yeah, Amy V. Vincent.
Yes.
Do you have an official website too, if they want to?
I do. That would be Amy Vincent ASC.
Cool.
.com.
Amy Vincent ASC, thank you so much for being on the show.
You are so welcome.
All right, that was Amy Vincent. Hey, so great having you on the podcast for the first time. I can't believe it's taken so long to finally make this happen. I'm so glad it did.
It's always funny to me, there are these moments where it's have we talked to so-and-so? Oh my God, we've never talked to so-and-so.
And you know what? It was I'm pretty sure that Amy Vincent was on a list of people we wanted to talk to when we first started.
1 billion %.
Yeah, it was there was a couple of names there, and I'm pretty sure that Amy Vincent was right near the top. And it's
I know she was.
And then how did we go this long? But anyway, I'm so glad we had her on. So much fun to talk to. Hey, Ben, it is our famed short ends.
And now, short ends.
Whoa,
I'm unfamiliar with this concept.
This is the time of the show when we talk about a pet obsession, something that we're into, something that we're binging, something that we're experiencing, something that is part of our life that doesn't have to necessarily do with media and entertainment, but probably does. So, Ben, what is your short end this week?
I'm going to do 2. I'm sorry. I'm going to cheat and do 2. Yeah.
Oh, you're taking advantage.
So the first one is... one of the podcasts that inspired us to start our podcast was a podcast called The RC that was co-hosted by our first guest, Jason Wingrove, and Michael Seymour of FX Guide. And I had been a huge fan of FX Guide. I had loved The RC, and I couldn't have been more excited to have Wingrove on as our first guest. And The RC, they about 8 or 9 years ago, they stopped doing them. But because of the acquisition of Red by Nikon, they put the band back together for just one episode to wrap it up. And it's an interesting episode. And I think if you're interested in kind of the history of this stuff, and it's funny to think of the history of stuff that we've just watched happen in our own industry, but the history of the early Reds and, before they even had viewfinders and all that stuff, because these guys were messing with Reds from the very, very beginning. and even DSLRs, and they talked about Nikons, and Wingrove actually said something that I had forgotten about Nikon, which is that the focus on Nikons, and this is why he doesn't like it, is that it focuses in the opposite direction of every other lens. So you kind of have to learn, your muscle memory doesn't work for you on it. And anyway, it's a great conversation and kind of a great summary of what we've gone through in the digital film world, and sort of how, to a degree, we're all kind of living in Red's world now. Like, Red forced a shift in the industry, and you may disagree. I'm seeing a skeptical look in your eye, but I feel like no matter
I want
what,
to know how it was forced. That's just how I want to know.
well,
How was it?
It wasn't forced, but what they did was they kind of came in and they did what disruptors do, and they didn't do it always as well as it could have been done. But because of what they did, most movies are made the way Red, in a similar architecture to how Red came up with what they came up with at that time and what that eventually turned into. They also kind of talk about kind of the weird dark periods of Red and when it didn't work. So let me get to my real short end, though. But definitely check out the article.
I am skeptical, actually, because it's interesting. There's a couple people. Michael Cioni even made comment to the same sort of thing. He didn't use the word forced, but he mentioned it on our episode just last week. But yeah, I've heard a few people kind of say something similar. It almost feels like talking points, and I don't know, but I definitely feel like it's an end of an era. I think it's actually the beginning of a better era. We'll talk about it next week, but I was at NAB. I talked to people from both Nikon and Red, and I thought that, it feels like a particularly bright future that some sort of Red bros don't really know how to feel, which is kind of interesting, because I don't think they're really seeing maybe they think it's a narrow path forward, but I think it's a pretty big path forward. I think it's going to be a really amazing thing what Nikon and Red do together.
I'm all in for it. I just thought it was interesting to hear those two guys talking again. And
I should give it a listen. No, I'm not going to judge it before I hear it. And I'm just listening to your synopsis of it. But no, I'm not going to judge it. I'll totally listen to it. I'd like to listen to it.
So I almost feel like I shouldn't do it, but my other short end was a film that was recommended to me by a producer I know named Tony Herbert, and it's called Cameraman. Have you heard of this? No. Cameraman, the life and work of Jack Cardiff. And
no, I don't know it.
It is on Tubi, so you can watch it for free right now. It's a documentary about Jack Cardiff. Do you know who Jack Cardiff is?
I'm ashamed to say I don't.
Jack Cardiff, you should know, was the DP of Rambo First Blood Part 2, but also the original Black Orpheus and the original Red Shoes and like all of these groundbreaking Technicolor movies. And he was actually an actor in silent films. And he died, I think, in 2010, around the time this movie came out.
I never saw Red Shoes, but of course people have talked about it.
Oscar winner. Yeah, this thing, they interview Kirk Douglas, they interview Martin Scorsese, they interview Alan Parker. There's tons of great interviews. The documentary itself is from like 2010. But when they're doing the documentary, you see Jack Cardiff in action, and he's still sharp as a tack, really smart, really knows what he's doing. And it walks you through sort of the history of three-strip Technicolor, and also like the movies that he made, which are all, the movies that I'm talking about are British, and I don't think they have as much of a footprint in American cinema, but they're very influential, especially to someone like Martin Scorsese, who they talk to. Martin Scorsese like literally talks about shots from the Red Shoes that he rips off in Raging Bull, for instance. And pays homage to. He pays homage. Martin Scorsese doesn't rip anyone off. He doesn't need to rip anyone off. Anyway, I just thought it was a brilliant documentary, and it's cool to see somebody like Jack Cardiff and to realize the influence that Jack Cardiff has had on, basically you and me and every guest we've ever had on this show. And also, like, you think of movies from that era as being, maybe staid or stodgy or dated or whatever. And then you look at some of the shots and some of the work that they were doing in Black Orpheus or whatever, and it's just stunning and shocking and gorgeous. And the camera that three-strip Technicolor camera, I mean, like,
it's crazy. Yeah.
You could complain about the size of an IMAX camera. It's about a third the size of a three-strip Technicolor camera.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts. There used to be one on display over at the Cinerama Dome, which I thought was always fun. People could go in there and gawk at it.
You could like climb in it. You could walk around inside it. You could, have a fish fry inside the 3-strip Technicolor camera. I'm saying it's a large camera. I don't know if that's coming across, but it's not a small camera.
Do they get into the process too of actually how they made those 3 different strips and then how they photographed them and how the whole thing worked, or does that kind of get glossed over?
They don't like get so into the technical weeds that it would make a non-cineast's eyes glaze over immediately. I just think it's worth checking out. It was directed by somebody named Craig McCall, and again, it's on Tubi, so you can watch it right now for free. You have to watch a couple ads.
Yeah, probably 1 or 2. Maybe 10.
Really only 1 or 2. I don't think I had to watch.
Good.
Maybe.
Yeah, I watched something on Tubi recently and it was like 7 ads and I was like, oh my God. It was like an ad every few minutes.
I think that like the newer the thing is, like if you're watching The Batman on Tubi, you're probably going to watch a lot more commercials than if you're watching a really cool documentary about an old cinematographer. So Ilya, now that I have overwhelmed everyone with my 2 obsessions of this week, that I don't know why I had time for 2 obsessions, because I was in the middle of a kerfuffle with the Blair Witch Project and talking to the Hollywood Reporter while I was designing 3 plays. So yours better be a doozy is all I'm saying. You got a lot to live up to.
No, it's not. And you know what? I'm gonna mercifully make one really short just because you had 2.
A short end.
Hey, you remember a company called Gimlet Media? They were famously acquired by Spotify some years ago. They had this incredible startup podcast, which kind of told the whole story of the formation of the company, which actually I think is kind of interesting because it's a little bit what Michael Cioni has done with Strata, kind of telling the formation. You kind of got to watch the whole thing on social media. And Spotify takes credit for basically everything Gimlet now is what it seems to me. But Gimlet produces a podcast called Science Versus. Science
I love it, yeah.
VS.
I've been listening to it for years.
Well, I just had a little bit of driving between here and in Vegas and back and whatnot, and I got a chance to listen to some Science Versus, and holy crap, that is a great podcast.
Wendy Zuckerman,
I'm learning. It's entertaining. It's well researched. It's like there's all this stuff going on in that podcast, and they do it very succinctly. So I haven't fact checked all the things that are in there. I feel like they probably checked it.
But at the end of every episode, they have a list of all their citations. Like it's not something that you usually hear in a podcast.
No, I really appreciate that. So maybe I didn't listen to the very end of the podcast that I was listening to. Maybe it just immediately jumped me to the next one. I don't
mean to be like this, but the citations are usually boring. And I'm like, yeah, I trust you. You could put them on the website. And if I really needed to follow up, I could check it out.
Well, I got to say, Science Versus, totally worth checking out. So if you are looking for a new podcast, you like to learn things, you like something a little educational, you like to hear from experts, check it out. It's on Spotify. So it's probably exclusive to Spotify. You might have a hard time finding it elsewhere, but I don't know. See if you can track down Science Versus.
Have you listened to Radiolab?
Oh, of course. Radiolab, Freakonomics. There's a bunch of things I like to listen to.
To me, Science Versus and Radiolab are kind of in the same vein in that they make science entertaining.
Yeah, I would actually argue it's a little like Planet Money too. Planet Money kind of does the same sort of formula, and of course I know Gimlet sort of like spawned out of Planet Money, so it's all kind of in the same sort of vein. But yeah, really good, well produced. Good show. Lots of episodes to get through. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. If you're just discovering it now, you got a lot to look forward to.
All right. So, Ben, that is really just about it for this show. If people want to find Ben Rock, where do they go to find you outside of this show?
Go to benrock.com. You can check out my reel. You can find my socials. You can read the bio that I had to write for myself once. God, I hate writing bios of myself. But that's probably the best place. And Ilya, what about yourself?
You can find me right now at Hot Rod Cameras here just post NAB. But coming up, I'm going to be at the Portland, or I guess now they've renamed it, the Pacific Northwest Lens Summit at Kerner Camera. That's going to be in early May. I think it's around May 3rd. If you have not RSVP'd, there are people who are flying in from all over to go to this. There is about, God, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 different lens manufacturers who are all kind of in the same space, showing off all their lenses. So if you're interested in comparing and looking at lenses and learning about lenses, you get them all in the same room, all at the same time. It goes on for 2 days. It's a lot of fun. You can find me up there. I'm going to be there for that. And then coming back to LA in June, beginning of June, is Cine Gear. But even more important than Cine Gear is Cine Beer. It happens the day after Cine Gear. It takes place at Hot Rod Cameras, and it is probably the best party that anyone will go to during the whole Cine Gear.
I can't believe that it's been a year since you did the last one, because I feel like I just left there. Like,
yeah. Yes, actually that cool bench that you had lunch on in front at Cinebeer, somebody stole it like a week ago, so now I got to get a new bench.
That's stupid.
It's also kind of a little unheard of in Burbank. People usually don't get their furniture stolen, but yeah, someone stole that bench. Anyway, but I remember
I guess someone needed a bench.
I guess so. Someone needed it more than me. This next one I maybe will have to like chain down to the ground or, around the tree or something. But it was a nice shady spot. It was a great spot to, enjoy Cine Beer. So anyway, Cine Beer is coming up. We do a raffle drawing for tons of like free gear, and you should definitely RSVP.
We used to do a live show there, but we haven't done one there since COVID.
We might do it again. I mean, no promises, but we got to figure it out. I've got a couple of things in the fire, and who knows, maybe it'll happen if it doesn't happen for Cinebeer, it'll probably happen for something else. So we're working on a couple of live show ideas. So producer Alana Cody, who we should thank for this episode, producer Alana Cody.
That was a good segue.
Thanks, I appreciate that. She is getting all the people lined up and making sure that we are in all the relevant places so that people can interact with me and the podcast and everything else. It is crazy. I've got quite the tour going on. I was, I think I mentioned in the previous shows, I was in London, I was in all these other places. The podcast kind of comes with me, and I've been meeting really cool people. When I was at NAB, I met a guy on the escalator who had a Dizio Vespid lens. I said, "Hey, how do you like your Vespid?" And he goes, "Ilya Friedman from the Cinematography podcast."
Wow.
Well, I mean, if any place it was going to happen, it was going to be at NAB.
That's true. That's still like, it's crazy.
But then later he was like, "Hey, I'm gonna be at your party." So he came all the way from Northern Kentucky to be at NAB, and so it was pretty awesome to connect. And we got to thank Kays Alatraci, Kays, who composed all the music you heard in the show. I tried to meet up with Kays while I was in town this week. Wah, wah. He's got relatives in from out of town. Couldn't make it happen. But Kays, if you're listening, next time I'm here, I'm gunning for you. Gonna try and figure out a time that we can meet up and get together. Ben, we should probably get you in that loop too. We got to talk about music. We got all this music. We got to talk about it. We got to figure it out.
We got to get on it. We got to get on it. And then lastly, we got to thank Ben Katz.
Ben Katz, whose job was not too easy this week, I think.
He is a warrior. He's an editing
He's a
warrior.
Strong man. He is slicing. He is dicing. He is julienne frying. He is doing all the things to make sure that this podcast comes together and seems coherent and like something that people actually want to listen to or watch.
Hopefully.
So Ben, I've really been enjoying this end of the show every week where I ask you to sign off and you don't remember what it is that you're supposed to say. Do you remember this week?
Thanks for tuning in. I forget what was the thing.
Until next time.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in.
Until next time, I'll hopefully remember it.
You'll forget again. You will forget next time. Yeah, it's that ADD. It's daddy brain. It's old brain. It's
also
until next time.
Almost 11 p.m. right now while we're
That's right.
recording
It is
this.
almost 11 p.m. All right, let's end this awkwardly by just like hitting stop right now.
All right.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.